So, how's a crime of such magnitude still shrouded in secrecy? So this is another issue that really frustrates advocates. The case of Amhara genocide is extremely frustrating for many. Actually, some turned on their own advocates because they keep on seeing no movement, like no outcome. We are at it for, there are those who started at the time of Professor Assad, a brilliant surgeon who saw, who foreshadowed the dangerous situation that's coming against Amharas as being planned, and started the All Amhara organization, political organization in mid-90s. Ever since then, for over 3 decades, people keep on trying to show how horrific the crime is, how extremely repressive the targeting is for Amhara people in Ethiopia. But again and again, things reset. They get to a point where it seems like they're gonna boil over, but things reset. So we have to see what are the ways the capability of Amhara people are curbed so that this situation is not changed for the better. Okay, we need to know that the movement being young, a critical mass need to be reached for a public movement to completely boil over. That's one issue. But also how organized and how systemic your opponents are matters. In this case, this is a very, very, very dense slide, but it's very important that I talk about this. So there are 4 things that happened that crippled the Amhara movement from exposing these crimes very quickly, from allowing Amharas to organize, and for other Ethiopians to understand the hurt, the harm that's coming to the community, and also for them to understand they're next in line if this system continues. The reason why it became so difficult in a very irrational way, because for a fresh advocate who just learned of the situation, you would think, oh my God, we have this footage. We have this extreme cruelty that has been happening against certain people. And it's obvious, if you're a human rights defender, you want to expose it, you want to stop it. But the situation is so complex, so systemic, so systematic, so sanctioned by a legal framework on one side, and on the other side, the targeted people are completely removed from power in such a way that they don't have a platform on which they can expose these crimes. So these 4 things that led to this situation are: first, systemic exclusion. So systemic exclusion is removal of Amharas from all positions of power since 1991. Non-ruling party affiliated Amharas, that is, not Amharas being kept as puppets in various positions within the ruling party. This was made possible as there was no Amhara-centric political party that represents Amharas in the ruling coalition that led the nation for the first 27 years since 1991. So this is the APRDF era. I'll go to the Prosperity Party era later, which is the reformed governments that brought the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in 2018. So the Amhara party in the ruling party was one converted from a pan-Ethiopian party that was allied with TPLF before the military regime change, which is before the Derg regime has changed. This specific party that claims to represent Amharas has been working with TPLF in the fight against the Derg regime in the name of being a pan-Ethiopian party. whereas all other ethnic groups had their own representatives when the system was changed into an ethnic-based governance system. This was not by choice of Amharas. The attempt made by prominent Amharas to set up an Amhara party, for example, the All Amhara People's Organization, founded by Professor Asrat Waldayas, was thwarted by coordinated targeting and detention of members, and later by murdering of its founder. That this later translated into lack of Amharas in all decision-making positions in government and both houses, as well as in all diplomatic missions run by the nation. Let's not forget that there are countless, there are over 150 embassies across the world that belong to Ethiopia. These are all the pathways that are being used to inform other nations against the Amharas, because the Amharas are absolutely removed from such locations where they can defend themselves through the diplomatic channel. Mind you, these are diplomatic missions, embassies, outposts, etc., are all facilities that Amharas helped build for centuries before they were used against them since early 90s. Which is really a tragic situation. This later translated into lack of Amharas in all decision-making positions in government and in both houses, as well as in all diplomatic missions run by the nation. This has a direct impact in hiding the genocide planned and executed against Amharas from beginning to end. Because the first step to facilitate the genocide is to make sure that you remove the targeted group from all locations of power, access to media, access to international community, completely sever that connection, and then everything gets kept hidden. So that's what the first thing TPLF and OLF and generally EPRDF did as soon as they took over power in the early 90s. Then came the specific systemic elite removal, targeting of the Amhara elite in a systemic way. So the majority of high-profile academicians, physicians, civil servants, artists, historians, etc., were removed from positions and platforms they can use to voice out the impending calamity in the first 5 years of the institution of the ethnic federalism system. So there was a systemic, massive exclusion. Then there comes the systemic elite removal. In this case, you remember over 45 Amhara professors were removed from from Addis Ababa University. This is part of the systemic elite removal. Then systemic policy-led targeting and cover-up. These are one of the most harmful practices that happened in the first 27 years since the system was imposed and in the mid-90s. This is a TPLF-led policy where health and educational policies were used to exacerbate Amhara targeting and anti-Amhara programming of Ethiopians. Skewed use of pressuring of and implementation of forced contraceptives, dismantling of health services like the anti-malaria system in Amhara region, the use of factory discharges directly into productive systems, into farmlands. For example, the example of the tannery that's built in Amhara region that used to exhaust byproducts directly into farmlands. The use of uniodized salt in Amhara region, which led to the stunting of the population. This is all systemic. The use of and then the systemic dismantling of factories and removal of machineries from the region, and also systemic enforceable settlement of people in disease-prone areas, for example, in malaria-prone areas, without providing quinine or any form of prevention. So these are all, everything that I mentioned until now is part of the slow onset genocide, things that are done at a policy level and a very slow but steady pace. And then came the systemic disinformation. Once acts of targeting, profiling, violence, and persecution were committed against Amharas at various rates, depending on the timing and location, due to lack of bodies that can expose these deeds due to the three factors mentioned above. It became very easy for state and non-state actors that coordinate with the anti-Amhara ruling party to easily tamper with evidence, testimonies, and reports so that all incidents are either buried or, when that is not possible, victims are reported as either non-Amhara or, even worse, Amharas are portrayed as perpetrators of the crimes committed against themselves. The network of disinformation is so tight that even international organizations are duped to using evidences of Amhara genocide and related incidents as evidences for unrelated cases, or even as evidence of the same Amharas for as evidence to blame Amharas for the same incidents that they are victims of. So I'll give you very, very interesting examples of 2 slides. This is actually extremely shocking. These are things that we show for different target groups to understand how deep the disinformation runs. So the first panel, there are 3 panels on this slide. You'll see that it's a snapshot of kids talking about what happened to them at Maikadra. So this is absolutely staged by by the Tigray TV during the northern Ethiopia war. So the advocacy group called Omna Tigray, in collaboration with Tigray TV, used evidence of Maikadra genocide. So for those who don't know, Maikadra is a location in Welkait. It's a city where over 1,600 Amharas were killed overnight by TPLF operatives just 4 days after the war, the northern Ethiopian war started on 4th of November 2020. So the incident itself happened on November 9, 2020. About 1,600, actually more, Amhara victims were killed horrifically. This is not with bullets. These are with machetes, with axes, with household utensils in a very, very horrific way. Children and mothers have seen fathers, their husbands being killed. It was very specific, very systemic. It was male Amharas that were targeted, and the women were forced to watch. And it is so planned that Tigrayan residents have been forced and told by the TPLF operatives to actually leave the location and go into Sudan ahead of the planned massacre. It got so bad that before the disinformation campaign started on November 14, the then and coincidentally the current leader, Dr. Debretsion, has actually, during his wartime briefings that he does every day, came out on November 14, 2020, and admitted that the victims were Amharas. But he actually blamed the attacks on the Abiy government, that it was the federal government that actually undertaken it. But what happened was actually within a few days, journalists and fixers were sent across the border into Sudan, and the refugees that were forced to leave Welkait, and specifically Maikadra, were told to report that the victims themselves were Tigrayans. So this is how the entire disinformation was engineered. So what you can see, as you can see, the advocacy group Omna Tigray here is posting on Twitter using the Mykadra story that the victims are not Amharas. So this is the kind of disinformation that the Amhara advocacy faces. You might think, okay, this is Tigray TV and on Omna Tigray. I'm not saying all the advocates do this all the time. There are advocates, Tigray advocates in Omna Tigray that I respect, that seriously work towards exposing crimes that happened against Tigrayans during the Northern Ethiopian War. And I think they continued their work up to date. But there are also those that have conspired with TPLF agents, the then TPLF authorities, and also TPLF officers and agents abroad to disseminate this disinformation that what happened in my Kadra actually wasn't, wasn't against Amharas, where in reality, over 1,600 Amharas were massacred horrifically, and a number of foreign journalists and news media services have actually went, on location, interviewed survivors that were taken to Gondar University at the Gondar Hospital at the time. There were, photojournalists and journalists that actually traveled on location, investigated, and reported that the victims were Amharas. So this is the kind of disinformation. But okay, this is a local, an Ethiopian origin media house and an ethnic-based advocacy group that does this. You might think, okay, it is expected because of how toxic the advocacy was going. Then you see Amnesty International in the middle panel using Matakal ethnic-based attack Amhara victims picture that was taken. You probably remember that my second guest, my guest on the third segment of Amhara Conversation, photojournalist Jamal Countess, was discussing this on my program, how his pictures were used, for the wrong context. It's true, stock pictures are meant to be bought and used, along with stories. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to, justice, an organization like Amnesty International, it should be easy and understandable that you block the pathway for justice for the victims when you report them as if, especially if they're the victims of genocide, as if their identity is different. So it took a lot of advocacy, a lot of online outroar for Amnesty International to change this picture, because this is an IDP camp picture of people who survived horrific attacks in Matakkal. You see them in tents. They are all Amharas, and they're being used for human rights Twitter posts that labels it as Tigray conflict. So this is the kind of thing that we try to fight. And a lot of people think, oh, there's no change, you're not doing anything. The thing is, it's not moving forward that should bother you. It's even going worse. Even stopping it where it is something compared to, leaving everything and leaving it for chance. And then things might even quickly get even worse than where we are now. The Amhara advocates are like ducks that have overworking feet under the surface of water, but they seem all calm and steady on top. But these are the kind of underlying tricky situation Amhara advocates face in terms of the advocacy landscape. Okay, third panel. This is Agence France Presse using Amhara victim stories in Bisober and Maikadra as if it happened in Tigray against Tigrayans. this is a specific footage that actually led to the videographer and the photographer to be awarded. But again, the actual story, the lady that's telling her story is an Amhara woman actually speaking in Amharic, but being reported as Tigran. Okay, another shocking disinformation case. Voice of America using Maghadra victims' funeral service as evidence while talking about an alleged Aksum massacre. So no footage has ever been produced for the incident in Aksum, whereas Maghadra Amhara victims' footage has been used repeatedly as evidence for atrocities in Tigray or against Tigrayans. So this VOA segment has been used to discuss the situation in Aksum. So this is not asking for VOA not to report on Aksum. No, that's not the case. The case is the case of misusing what happened in Maghadra, using the footage as if it happened in Aksum. Another case that murkies the situation. Following a lot of work, advocacy, lobbying, and a lot of outrage, VOA at the time actually removed it from their YouTube channel, but they didn't apologize for the content that they used for their live audience. Okay, another middle panel. So the then member of the board of advisors of Genocide Watch, Mukesh Kapila, a very known character that openly insulted Ethiopians during the northern Ethiopian war. Not the regime, not the government, but generally the people in a very xenophobic way. But that's just an additional information. In here, you see that he's making use of the evidence of Amhara genocide in Ayeshawa, Amhara region, in an incident that saw the complete destruction of the town. One of the 10 times that Aye has been burned by, OLA / Senay / Ethiopian National Defense Force / Oromo Special Forces that always coordinate somehow when they come to attack the town, as if it was carried out against the Tigrayans in Tigray. So this is a case where the picture literally was used for advocacy in Tigray. Again, this doesn't support Tigrayans at all. Not even one bit. This is burying evidence so that the Amhara genocide is not exposed. It doesn't help Tigrayans at all. And it actually, I have a theory why even the regime itself prefers victims to be called other Ethiopians than Amharas, because the conviction to take this to court, the conviction to see through justice, you see it in the Amhara cause. Whereas in the other causes, they're sort of inclined to negotiate with the regime, with international partners, because they have no specific bitterness against the system. I don't mean the people, but those in power, whether it's TPLF or RLF or etc., even if they have beef with the current regime at the moment, but if they're given the chance of, some sort of access to power, they would still negotiate and remove their questions on human rights, on genocide and tag-getting, detention, forfeiture of properties, because a lot of all this that have been happening against Amharas for the past 35 years have started happening to Tigrayans ever since they left power. Because we've discussed already the power in the governance structure in Ethiopia, it's made in such a way that it only benefits those groups that are in power. It's just rigged that way. And we saw this instantly the minute that TPLF was removed from power, especially after, not even before even before the Northern War has started, Tigrayans have started being targeted in Addis Ababa. Their their businesses were confiscated. Of course, there is some kind of justification the perpetrators want to give that these individuals have illegally used state finances or have accumulated this in illegal way because TPLF is in power. But this is just posturing because there should be a due process of law in order to confiscate these properties. You cannot just take property because they're Tigrayans and at some point TPLF used to lead the country, because that's the same vicious circle we are in. So basically, to a point, sometimes you see that shifting victims' identity away from Amharas is self-preservation for the regime. They would rather have victims reported as Oromos, Tigrayans, Somalis, Afaris, etc., because the political groups that are currently, in power from these groups, because there isn't a significant resistance against the government from these groups now. They don't mind sustaining the system as long as there is some pathway to access to power. Whereas the Amhara movement is hell-bent on completely removing the system. So it is self-preservation. It is partly, it's not because they support the grants, it's not because they support Oromos that they swap victim identity, but they know that the Amhara movement is absolutely dangerous for the existence of this system. So for the vanguards of the system, they absolutely fight the whole concept of exposing the Amhara genocide. The last example is another very, very sad incident where you might remember in Metakal, there was a time when there was a huge attack against the Amharas for years. So starting from 2018, it has never stopped. It goes on and off, and the attacks are gruesome in nature. They make use of, lethal weapons, machetes, axes, spears, burning, a lot of horrific ways. It's almost like, the plot to a horror movie, except that this is real life and it is happening to real people. And this has been happening in Matagal. Coincidentally, there were also OLA forces and some in collaboration with TPLF forces that used to operate in some Matagal areas. So during an operation, a joint operation by the Ethiopian National Defense Force and the Sidama Special Forces, this is a specific incident that the world needs to know. They caught 13 operatives, which are a mix of OLA and TPLF operatives, and this force on the regime side killed 12 of them instantly, and the 13th person has actually escaped at the Grand operative, probably under TPLF and also collaborating with OLA. And what they did was they burned him alive, and this has been recorded. It's a horrific situation where we condemned immediately, but the sad issue was that, as you can see, there was a post made by William Davison from the International Crisis Group. This is it's not a trivial international organization. It's a think tank that nations and lawmakers listen to when they actually issue reports. And unfortunately, William Davison was a notorious supporter of TPLF during EPRDF time, as we all know. So he has falsely accused Amhara forces of this very horrific atrocity. A Tigrayan man that has been burned alive in Matakan. Amhara Fanus were nowhere in Matakan at the time. Amharas have not even started to resist in an armed way in Metakkal until very recently. They used to just flee the area and then go into Amhara region whenever these horrific attacks start. So William Davison posted out of the blue that Amhara Fanos did this, and it was just like wildfire. MPs in UK, House representatives in New Jersey, personalities from State Department, just people just kept on sharing this information. It was horrific. On one, for Amhara advocates, this was a nightmare because on one side, for years, Amharas have been burned alive in this location. Nobody did say anything. When this happened, we were horrified. It doesn't matter the identity of the person. This shows how horrific the crimes that are committed in Metakkal look like. What is shocking is that usually it's either the Gumuz militias or the OLA operatives, or the rebel belligerents that actually used to undertake these crimes. What we saw and what was shocking in this case, in case of this Tigrayan man that has been burned alive, it was uniformed ENDF and Sidama Special Forces that have been doing this. And on the video, of course, you hear them speak Amharic, but Amharic is the national language, the working language of the country. And you have these forces from all different ethnic groups in the National Defense Force and Sidama Special Forces. The only way they can communicate is using, the working language. And people like William Davison, they just went with it. In the end, as you can see that the small Amharic text here from mereja.com, it shows that the government in the end hunted down these specific people from ENDF and Sidama forces and kept them accountable, whether it was fair, whether what they're charged with is comparable to the horrific crime they have done. It's debatable because this is the regime's own forces that has done that. But that clearly was communicated that 40 members of the security forces were persecuted by the government, by the regime itself, and it clearly mentioned the forces, and Amhara Fano is not mentioned there at all. But the disinformation is still perpetrated by some knowingly, some very few fringe TPLF supporters who still do not understand the issue is not Amhara hate, that the issue is not the hate they hold against the Amhara group. The issue is that they instilled the wrong system that ended up targeting themselves as well. So I sometimes still see this story being reported as Amhara Fanos being the perpetrator, but this has largely been debunked thanks to Amhara advocates that have worked day and night to expose this. So the reason I'm putting this is to show how the depth of the disinformation, how difficult it is to battle this. It's not just the amount of the volume of information we put out there. Few strategic lies can dismantle mindlessly repeated truths. Because if you target them to the same echo chamber, it doesn't matter how much you talk about the hurt you're going through, you people are bleeding, but few strategically placed lies can absolutely dismantle an honest cause. And these 6 examples should shock you, because groups like International Crisis Group, organizations like Amnesty International, KVOA has been defunded now, but it used to be a very powerful news service globally. Agence France Presse, Genocide Watch, Tigray has recently hasn't perpetrated such disinformation against Amharas. I'm thankful for that. I have seen their recent testimony for the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission for the U.S. Congress, and the advocacy was largely positive, because there could be Amhara individuals, there could be Tigrayan individuals, or Oromo individuals that perpetrated crimes against, one's people. That's completely different from generally, demonizing, dehumanizing, and putting disinformation against a whole group of people. So you specifically talk about the group, you talk about the individuals that caused any hurt, harm, whether it's crime or whether it's immoral. Then you talk about it, you advocate, you expose that person, whether they're individual, whether, from any identity group, whether ethnic or religion. Within this toxic group, the only way we can move forward is at least by being honest. But especially during the Northern Ethiopian War, the level of disinformation against the Amharas was sickening. And these are just some examples. So these are for some of you who actually ask questions, why aren't we moving forward? It is important to understand the depth of the problem that we're facing. So now, okay, that is the part where we see what made it very difficult, what made it very hidden, and what made it very difficult for Amharas to break through the surface tension. But again, another question that we have to ask, why do other groups, especially anti-Amhara groups, have higher visibility in the international arena, whether it's international media, whether it's think tanks, whether it's political groups, apart from the fact that there's some, additional to the fact that there are some countries, there's some nations that would actually benefit to maintain the status quo of having this ethnic federalism, apartheid system in the country, because obviously the system weakens the people, divides the people. So by design, it weakens the nation. So the regime thinks it's bread and butter and doesn't want to remove it. The people are put in a position where they fight each other all the time, so they cannot remove it. But there are certain external groups that actually want this system to remain in Ethiopia because it keeps you weak. If you have a strategic concern, let's take Egypt for an example. It doesn't mean that we will always be enemies with Egypt. No, there is always a narrow pathway. If brilliant diplomats, if people who care about their people and nation take hold of the country, once the system is removed, we can put ourselves in a position where Egypt doesn't have to fear us, because sometimes it is self-preservation why Egypt always chooses the wrong outcome for Ethiopia, if you must say. Always supporting ultra radical national groups that threaten the unity of the country, because they themselves are put in a position where they cannot trust governments in Ethiopia, because they believe the Nile is their source of civilization, their source of survival. But if when a nation has powerful leaders, wise leaders, brilliant leaders, even from a position of power, it can convince opponents that there are reasons why we would choose not to oppose, we would choose not to withhold resources that on which Egyptians depend on. But because we don't have that reality anymore, we don't have people like Aklilu Habtawald. For years, Ethiopians were brilliant diplomats. But ever since the system is imposed in the country, and also during the military regime, Ethiopia has lost her luster, because leaders are so much bogged down in maintaining their own power and maintaining their own resources by hook or crook. So that would always lead them to compromising national interest. And so when we talk about external factors, just because we have leaders that would make us look like dangerous, I'll give you a very good example. When you have, for example, what Prime Minister Abiy did against Eritreans during the Northern Ethiopian War. Everybody says there you don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. That is true, but it is within a reason. You don't turn things at a neck-breaking speed. Once you make an alliance, at least for sure you have to taper out of that alliance, especially down to a point of military alliance. It's not like actual boots on the ground. It's not just some soft diplomacy, soft alliance that was ongoing between Ethiopia and Eritrea during the Northern Ethiopian War. So the minute Abiy decided to talk with TPLF, it didn't give a graceful exit against Eritreans and Eritrean government. It actually dropped them as hot potato. This is the kind of thing that this is beyond being permanent enemy or permanent friends. This is beyond calculating interest and benefits. This is being silly. At a contrast, let me give you a very good example what a brilliant diplomat would make in such cases. Interests always shift. So during King David, in the I think it's in 15th or 14th century, I might be wrong. This is a time when the Adal Sultanate, the leader of the Adal Sultanate, has actually invaded which is a Muslim Sultanate, invaded the Christian kingdom. Both Ethiopians, by the way, both Abyssinians, for the sake of a power struggle. So based on their different religions, the Christian kingdom has been supported by the Portuguese government, whereas the Adal Sultanate, which Ethiopians call Muhammad, the leader, Ethiopians call him Muhammad Grain or Muhammad the Left-Handed. I think his name is Sultan Ahmed Al-Gore. So he was supported by the Ottoman Empire. So at the time, there was a very high turnover of kings on the Christian kingdom side, on the Abyssinian king side, both again under Abyssinian territory, but the emperor was Christian at the time. So there was a very powerful queen, Queen Sabla Wangel. So Queen Sabla Wangel actually brokered a lot of the support with the Portuguese at the time. There was a lot of proxy war that was ongoing on Ethiopia. The Portuguese and the Ottoman forces were clashing. Same with the forces of Ahmed Kaghan, forces of King David as well, of Queen Sabla Wangel's forces. So they come to a point where the Adal Sultanate was defeated. They left. And then things quickly changed because, as you know, the Ethiopian nation, Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo religion was a state religion at the time. And the Portuguese were Catholic. So things changed very quickly right after the victory of Ahmed Kaghan being defeated, and there came the Oromo invasion and a lot of fragmentation of the Ethiopian kingdom happened. So that a lot of the princedoms came a lot of princes, started taking power. At the time, the Portuguese that came to support Queen Sablowanger started clashing with the Orthodox Christian authority. So now, because the Orthodox Christians have become nervous that the Portuguese are going to convert Ethiopia into Catholicism, they actually surrounded 350 fighters, the Portuguese fighters. So the wind has changed already, and the Portuguese and Ethiopians were allies at some point. The war was completed. But now another conflict happened, and the royal court, some of the royal courts actually, there are also people who converted into Catholicism. So the situation is very difficult. But what Queen Sabla did was she negotiated and actually secured the release of these Portuguese fighters, even if her nation has already changed her stance. The royal court, the nation, the church has already started seeing the Portuguese as enemies because of this religious tension. But she didn't do what Abiy did. She didn't turn around and shoot them down. No, she has to complete the alliance she started. So she had to safely get them removed. Whatever continues, then unfortunately, a clash happened between the, Catholic, the stance of the Catholic Church was trying to convert Ethiopia into, a Catholic nation, but the stronghold for centuries, Ethiopians have been Orthodox Christians. So the wind have changed completely. But what happened was, at that juncture, even if there are no permanent enemies and permanent friends, even if only there is permanent interest, but you do it with grace. You do it in such a way that your allies understand going forward, you will not be an ally for some time until this new situation that you face is resolved. But at least you will honor what you have agreed upon on your previous alliance. But right now, that's not what you see. Such wisdom has been lost from Ethiopia. What you currently see is a government, a regime that would do anything to stay in power, whether it sacrifices the people, the children, the seniors, the state's assets, the resources, the history of the nation. Its allies. Ethiopia, for the longest time, has been an unallied nation, has been trusted. Interestingly, especially recently, we're known for being poor, for war, but Ethiopia hasn't been like that for centuries. It's been a source of one of the ancient civilization. And part of our soft power, part of our soft asset was brilliant diplomacy. And so what this regime is doing beyond genocide, beyond tyranny, beyond repression, is destroying the soft assets of the nation. So within this context, you can see why it's extremely difficult to expose this crime. But it's also very important to understand that with the lack of this brilliance in diplomacy, the nation is seen as anyone, as a target anyone can trample on. And it's always easier to keep the nation weak when the leader of that nation cannot be trusted, regardless of their belief, regardless of their conviction to keep national interest. But if you cannot be trusted to complete a pact or an alliance, then other nations would rather keep you weak and divided, whether your intention is to hurt them or not. So just by that fact, we have to understand that a lot of nations don't mind us staying within this ethnic federalism system. even if it doesn't benefit them at all. But then there's also how tricky and how dynamic and dangerous the ultra radical nationalist groups from the 60s were, that makes them visible for the international community and the international media. So let me quickly go through that. This is the second part of the program, but I'm sure you will enjoy it because this gives us the background of who are the main actors, internal and external. Okay, so what you see on the left is the 1976 OLF program, and what you see on the right is the 1974/76 TPLF program. It has been edited. So if you see both, there is the English translation on the TPLF one. On Article 5, on the OLF one, it says their program supports the Arab people's struggle against Zionist aggression in the struggle of the Palestinian people to recover their homeland. This has nothing to do with showing solidarity with Palestinians. This has nothing to do with being anti-Zionist. This is a copied movement because at the time, socialist movements showed solidarity to certain causes because those countries were on the pathway of becoming socialist. If you see Algeria, if you see Cuba, if you see Tunisia, there were tendencies of becoming socialist. So because of that, because this is a time when the world was separated into the East and the West Bloc, where there was a Cold War. So any nation that inclines to support the West, their cause gets amplified by the West. Any nation that tends to to gravitate to the East, their causes get amplified by the East. So you see on their document, you see a lot of the support of Palestinian movement, a lot of anti-Zionism, a lot of anti-imperialism, a lot of anti-American sentiment, and a lot of the early programs of OLF, TPLF, ONLF, all these ultra-radical nationalist separatist groups during the 60s were anti-imperialism, communist, and also very specific sort of socialism. For example, TPLF used to claim that they practiced the Albanian kind of socialism, which is very repressive, by the way. So you would question, so why is it then that these elements are being supported by the West? Because they're very dynamic and they can position themselves and they bury their past history very quickly, and they dynamically rewrite their story so that the world sort of doesn't understand their origin. The genocidal agenda, the taking over of ancestral lands, or the claiming of locations, because before 1991 in Ethiopia, nobody tries to label a location for an ethnic group. People just mingled and lived together. But they had this thinking even back then. This is an OLF 1974 program on the left. As you can see, it is signed as done at Finfinne, Oromia, October 1974. So the plan to annex, the plan to assimilate, the plan to put this genocidal plan forward was already being designed in 1974 by OLF. Same thing with TPLF. If you look at, this is from Wayin. This is a magazine that TPLF used to issue for their fighters, for their supporters. This is a number 1, August 1978. On their forward, they indicate areas, places like they claim from Afar, Tal, Ago, Saho, ወልቃይትና ጸለምት. These are all areas that they plan to claim. And as you can see on their map, there is the actual Tigrayan province as it was in 1978, and then areas that they plan to claim already being drafted. And this came out of course, insecurity, because they were at war with the regime in Ethiopia, and on certain occasions, even if they're allies with EPLF, the Eritrean People Liberation Front, there are times when they were at odds. On those times, Eritreans used to bar their boundaries, their crossings for TPLF fighters. So that actually made them nervous when they're at war with Ethiopia, and if at the same time they have disagreement with EPLF fighters, they felt like they might be stranded. So they theorized that by annexing Walqait, Agade, Humara, and Talant, it would give them a boundary with a third country, Sudan. So this was a tactical decision in order to achieve liberation. In a scenario where they're at odds both in forces in Eritrea and in the regime in Ethiopia. So it was just a tactical solution that led to close to 1 million Amharas suffering and displacement. Another assimilation agenda. This is Oromia Speaks. It's a magazine produced by OLF in 1981. So you can see that huge blob there on the Horn of Africa is what's being claimed by Oromia, according to OLF. And you can see this is the cover of the Oromo Liberation Front program with a subtitle. It titles The Struggle of the Oromo People, and the subtitle says Against Ethiopian Occupation and Amhara Despotism. So it's actually really fascinating for a part of the whole to go up against the entire whole and claim occupation. It's a very, like an inception kind of a Russian doll kind of concept where you are a part of something, and that entire something is being blamed for occupying you, while in reality that entire Oromo invasion happened in the 16th century, and Ethiopia has been a nation for thousands of years, still on that location. So out of all that, you can see that almost 80% of the country is being claimed here by the OLF movement. It doesn't stop there. You can see that there are locations that are being claimed across in Kenya as well. So the intent, the program being designed and organized, you can see in these early documents. So finally, in all of this, how come out of all this very, very worrying agenda, especially these separatist groups like TPLF and OLF that were hell-bent on balkanizing the country, and especially having early programs that are very against the West, how did they manage to get this support? So that is the one thing that we need to understand. There was a lucky, or maybe you can call it calculated, support from the West. Let's take USA, for example. The United States at first tried to work with pan-Ethiopian groups to depose the socialist regime in Ethiopia. As you remember, it was during Cold War. The socialist regime was horrible. It was tyrannical. There was torture, red terror. It was just like Khmer Rouge. It was just like the case in a lot of the cases in Latin America. It was a horrific regime. And the people were happy that the West was against it. But the problem is there was no viable pan-Ethiopian group that could ally with the West back then. What did go wrong? It wasn't, TPLF was already socialist at the time, for all intents and purposes. OLF was socialist. I showed you on their programs. So how did the West ally with them to overthrow another socialist regime? So basically, it's the lack of option. Democratic pan-Ethiopian groups were deliberately sabotaged by these separatist groups because pan-Ethiopian groups don't organize against along ethnic lines. So these ultra-radical ethnic nationalist groups used to send their infiltrators in the pan-Ethiopian groups so that nothing works. This is the case of EPRP and all the other, pan-Ethiopian oppositions at the time. And some were socialists or communists themselves in their programs. So what went wrong? All separatist groups infiltrated pan-Ethiopian democratic groups and made them dysfunctional. This is still evident in the fact that major opposition parties that are supposed to be pan-Ethiopian are supporting and propping up the regime and the genocidal ethnic apartheid system. Each of their leaders from the 60s can be traced to factions that dissociated pan-Ethiopian groups, making it impossible for the Western allies who were working against the Eastern Bloc to find pan-Ethiopian partners in Ethiopia. And this is true till this day. You can look at the leader of Gambot Sabat, G7, and later Izema, Dr. Brahanu Nagga, working for the regime that it vowed to dismantle during his time as an opposition or an opponent of the regime. But the underlying factor is that pan-Ethiopian groups were deliberately made ineffective, so that the separatist groups can advance. One very quick evidence, Ethiopian security police seized and tortured CIA agent. This is from 1986. It was published on Washington Post. You know that CIA documents, national security documents, unless they're very, very high level confidential and still active secret or intelligence, they become declassified every 50 years. So this is one of the situation where a CIA document was declassified after 50 years, and it was published on Washington Post. So what it literally shows was that how a CIA agent was caught and tortured by the Derg regime. But the backstory of this is obviously, I think it was a party called IDHAC. The CIA agent was working with them, but he was exposed because of such sabotage from separatist groups, which led for Western groups to be forced to work with separatist groups to remove the socialist regime. It was Cold War. They were going against all those kinds of regimes across the world. They probably theorized that these separatist groups will end up changing their tune because socialism has completely expired globally. So they probably are not worried that they will, install another socialist regime. So their priority was to remove the military regime. And there was no effective, non-dysfunctional pan-Ethiopian group at the time. So even if these groups were anti-West in the beginning, but like I said earlier, lucky, maybe, or calculated, they ended up being allies with the West. Separatist parties turned out to be double-faced partners in the end. Like I said earlier, that brilliance in diplomacy, that the art of keeping alliances, the art of negotiating, give and take, and coming to a common interest, the art of keeping non-allied, being an non-allied as much as possible so that you can get benefited from all sides without being bogged down any camps and in any different political powers. This art has been lost ever since these separatist, vicious groups took over Ethiopia. And that created the vicious cycle where allies cannot trust Ethiopian leaders anymore because they would sell for anything as long as you keep their power. The ethnic apartheid system is a self-destructive system. You have to keep on sacrificing yourself in order to exist. You have to keep on, in a way, humiliating yourself because there isn't anything that they wouldn't negotiate upon or wouldn't change their stances upon as long as they continuously get support and stayed in power. And there is absolutely no mechanism for the people to keep them accountable, once again, because the people are kept divided because of the same system. So that ended as that ended up being, a nation with governors that can be trusted. And we can give specific examples where at the time of WikiLeaks, a lot of secrets of a lot of different governments has been leaked. And what was interesting was that it showed how these EPRDF leaders were two-faced, double-faced, not even enough to sustain a short-term alliance. There were cases where they used to take military equipments and allow North Korean officials to operate on them, which is an absolute no-no when it comes to the US policy of, transferring military. It might not be military secrets because we might not get latest, military equipments in Ethiopia from the US, but still there were specific provisions where the US indicated that they don't want their equipments or their facilities in Ethiopia to be accessed by North Koreans, but EPRDF went ahead and did it. There was a leak that shows that on the surface, the Prime Minister Meles seemed to be friends with al-Bashir of the Zain, Sudan president, but how it was conspiring to get him seized while in transit. So a lot of very mortifying state secrets were revealed during this WikiLeaks, and it showed one thing: it's what we expected. No integrity, no trust capital for international players and other powers to form a persistent alliance. So all this gives other external powers a good reason to keep the country under a status quo, under a system that keeps us weak and divided, just by the fact of the matter that the leaders cannot be trusted. So what is the conclusion to conclude this part of our program? Conclusion regarding the vanguards of current ethnic apartheid system in Ethiopia. The mosaic of separatists that formed alliance from 1970s onwards in Ethiopia are dubious allies, are programmed to balkanize Ethiopia at the first sight of problem or losing power. Because of their ethnic-based ultranationalism, they are a threat to the entire Horn of Africa countries that have overlapping ethnic groups with Ethiopia, because they tend to use their population that crosses over into neighboring countries to instigate and weaponize that relationship. We've seen this in Kenya, we've seen this in Djibouti, we've seen this in South Sudan, we've seen this in Sudan, we've seen this in Eritrea. The entire surrounding nations one way or the other, we have overlapping ethnic identities all around the borders of Ethiopia. And the ethnic nationalist regime leverages this overlap in order to instigate various problems for neighboring countries. They are fundamentally undemocratic, therefore always bound to form alliance with undemocratic or tyrannical forces on the background, while they seem to be good allies and positive in terms of allying on specific issues. It could be, war on terror, or the green agenda, or it could be war on drugs, whatever major theme or agenda the US or other countries or the G7 or the G20 may have. They may seem to be a positive allies, but their real alliance in the end on the background is always with tyrannical forces that destabilize the world. So I can wrap up this part of our program. My next program will also be a commentary to finalize this background part of the presentation, so that we can get to those 9 interesting milestones that that I've selected from Amhara advocacy. But there are a lot more. People are very, very welcome to come on my program and discuss those. If your group has done any advocacy, any effort that actually came up with an impact. We recognize meetings matter, rallies matter, podcasts matter, social media activism matter. That is our day-to-day commitment. But we especially celebrate those that end up impacting and changing policies, forcing reactions. So we specifically highlight those, but that doesn't mean the day-to-day engagement is not useful. So Ethiopia was a stable country that had great diplomatic relations with nations in Africa, the West, and the Near and Middle East. It also solved its regional and international problems diplomatically, more often than not. As an ancient empire, Ethiopia went through a lot of wars, but war has always been the last resort. There was a lot of interesting times in our history where things were resolved diplomatically. These are pictures from the last monarch engaging diplomatically with the president of USA, president of Egypt, and the king and queen of Iran. All 3 nations have specific and unique role in the political power landscape currently and in our world, but even back then as well. US globally was a powerhouse. Egypt was specifically important for Ethiopia in terms of how our interaction always, one way or the other, affect both nations, because the Nile being a resource that we share. But there is a world's difference in how the diplomatic space have completely closed off ever since the military socialist regime took over in the late 60s, early 70s, and then the worst part is the ethnic federalism system even made it worse, because that gave again the option for nations that might take us at a threat to just support that system rather than take the difficult pathway of negotiating with us for a better outcome. Because once you give a weakness for think is a very good way to wrap up the current session. Once again, I made this commentary because we're at a very critical juncture where we have to understand all this sacrifice is to once and for all solve this extremely horrific and gruesome system. The system itself is horrific because it enables horrific and gruesome incidents to take place, almost in a legal framework. So to trust the same regime to dismantle it is actually, I don't even have a word for it. It's to be willingly be sacrificed, not just us, but our also future generations. And part will kind of look at the current situation, and then I'll show you the 9 impactful examples from the Amhara advocacy. This is generic. Also other communities in Ethiopia, or also other communities in East Africa can actually make use of what I've been discussing today, because persistence for any just cause is one of the strongest pillars of, making your cause successful, especially when the cause is only supported by blood, grit, sweat, and conviction, not by any source of interest group or interest money. The only friend you have is your persistence, and that in the end pays off. Thank you very much. We'll see you on our next segment.